As we stand at the crossroads of environmental challenges, one of the key issues we need to address is how can we foster human capabilities and competence to withstand the tumultuous waves of change. According to the World Meteorological Society, over the past 9 years, these have been the warmest on record. Greenhouse gases are at a record high. Ocean heat content has reached its highest level in 2022, and the Antarctic sea ice is at a record low. Disasters often disproportionately affect people at the margins, and today we will discuss how we need to come together to make physical environments, agricultural systems, and most importantly, communities much more resilient. Climate change has had adverse socioeconomic impacts, including on food security and population displacement. Extreme weather is destroying lives and livelihoods on a daily basis, underlining the imperative need to ensure that everyone is protected by early warning services. At Reliance Foundation, where I work, focusing on building climate adaptation, climate resilience, and supporting disaster risk reduction, mitigation, and response in India have been an integral part of our commitment to social responsibility. We support in building safer and disaster resilient communities through holistic, proactive, technology-driven, and sustainable initiatives, which involve all stakeholders, especially at the community level, and foster a culture of prevention, preparedness, and mitigation. We believe in a community-first approach, and one of the things that we've seen very strongly in our work is the power and resilience of individuals and communities. And to spotlight this, Reliance Foundation collaborated with Sphere India to develop this publication, which we're proud to launch today, Stronger Together, a compendium of stories, courage, and resilience during disasters. This book shows how individuals and communities have braved disasters, including cyclones, floods, epidemics like COVID-19, and the lumpy skin disease in livestock over the past few years. And these stories tell the stories of individuals from disaster-prone areas across India, and include the stories of people like Dayamanti, who kept her community in Ganja Madisha safe from cyclones and floods, and Vinod in Maharashtra Satara, who left no stone unturned in helping his community face COVID-19. Every story in this publication speaks to the importance of strong capacity building to ensure that there is resilience at the grassroots. And it shows the impact that enhancing this capacity and fostering community-level leadership to help future strategies can have when we're trying to build disaster resilience. These experiences provide valuable insights into bold initiatives by individuals and communities, which can often go unnoticed, but have the potential to foster mutual learning and identification of best practices, which, whilst happening at the local level, can be applied nationally and globally. We hope this publication thus becomes a befitting prelude to the panel today, which will discuss how vulnerable communities and countries can learn from each other by sharing experiences. Whilst the planet may be angry, if we take action, we can turn things around. But we need to ask bold questions today and take even bolder steps of action. And whilst we need to look at what are the major initiatives that need to be taken to catalyse greater global collaboration and cooperation towards climate resilience and adaptation, it's important that we also focus on the key role that empowering resilient communities can have. And I'd now like to hand over to our moderator for this evening, Louise van Schaik, who will chair this discussion on these issues. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. This was really brilliant. And it's brilliant also to see how you've looked at people in communities and how they find ways to respond to disasters. So my name is Louise van Schaik. I work for a think tank, the Netherlands Institute of International Relations, Klingendaal. And we work also a lot on climate security, but it means I'm also from a country where we have done centuries in fighting water, and we also have a relatively big agricultural sector, but like here in India, they're also at times angry and also struggling even with drought, even though usually a lot of water is also our problem. So I'm really pleased to moderate this session called Angry Planet. I think it's the best title that I've seen for this conference because it really encapsulates the issue. But we can all sit here and cry about the state of our planet, but we can also think about what can we actually do about it, and that's what we are going to do in this panel. And I'm really pleased that I'm joined here actually by 2 CEOs, 2 presidents, and 1 premier. So we have a fantastic lineup of speakers. So the first, and it already says in the name, is the Premier, Scott Moe, the Premier of the government of Saskatchewan from Canada, a very cold region, but also a region with a lot of agricultural capacity. Then I'm joined here with Jaganatha Kumar. He's the CEO of the Reliance Foundation, so he's the one that helped setting up the study, and he's in charge of the study, but he's also somebody with a lot of expertise on technology, investment, and let's say the agricultural angle. Then we're joined here by Kwame Owino. He is the CEO of the Institute of Economic Affairs in Canada, and he will enlighten us on the Horn of Africa perspective on these issues. Then we have Rahul Savani. He's the President Asia Pacific of Corteva AgriScience, and he's based in Singapore, but he's responsible here for this region. And he has a lot of things to say on, let's say, the technologies and the solution side. And last but certainly not least, I'm joined here with Sara Roversi, and she is the founder and president of the Future Food Institute in Italy. And of course, if we think about food, we think of Italy. But she's one of these key persons that also thinks about, food systems and how these can be changed and how more systemic approaches can be used for the food sector. So with these 2 CEOs, 2 presidents, and 1 premier, I would like to open up the debate, and I would like to give the floor first to Scott Moe, the premier of the government of Saskatchewan in Canada. And really to hear from you, your perspective on this issue of the angry planet. Please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Louise, and you pronounce Saskatchewan very well. Good job. It's not the easiest province. Actually, it's probably the most difficult province in Canada to pronounce. A little bit about the province where I live is, yes, it's cold there today, but we do have about 100 days of very good, productive weather throughout the summer. We have about 40% of the arable agricultural land in Canada is in the province of Saskatchewan. And so agriculture for over a century now, or for the time that we have been a province, has very much been at the backbone of the provincial economy. And I would say that Saskatchewan, very much through our research-based institutes, through various touch points, participates in the global conversation around agriculture, food security, and I think increasingly today, part of the helping answer the question as to how you are producing the products that you are as well. So food security is ultimately what we're all after at the end of the day, wherever you might live. And there's still, the title of this panel is An Angry Planet, but we're still a hungry planet as well. And so we need to understand that the goal is food security, but we want to have sustainable production within our aspiration to achieve that goal so that there are not hungry people on the planet. Sustainable production by supply, nutrition, but also sustainable production from an environmental perspective. And I think I would just set the stage a little bit on how we can get there is through collaboration. Through here having 2 CEOs, 2 presidents, and a premier in a country a long ways away from where I live, but a country that is very, very important to, and of which Saskatchewan is part of the supply chain and part of the food security question in India, as well as 150 other countries around the world. So bringing people together to discuss research-based solutions, bringing people together to discuss adaptation, to discuss some of the climate resilience that we have to bring into our agricultural portfolios and our production systems around the world. So really, I think the message that I will bring here today is one of collaboration, collaborating on research, collaborating through commerce on innovation, collaborating on ag tech into the future, so that we can all produce enough food for the people that inhabit Earth, but to ensure that we're doing it without making an angry planet.
All right, thank you. That was a very good kickoff for the session, and I'm really sure that the next speaker, Jaganatha Kumar, has something to say about this as well. How is the issue of the angry planet being lived here in India, and what are ways to address it?
Thank you. As my colleague Vanita has already kind of set the stage in terms of the work that we do, I would not go so much into the that part of it. But I'll give you a few examples as to why, picking up from what Scott also said in terms of the relevance of collaborations. And more importantly, I think we need to go back to the grassroots. We start from there in terms of the work that we do. You know, at the end, if you really look at the number of people who are affected by these climate risks, 80% of the global vulnerable population is actually in these vulnerable areas. And those are the people we need to be really worried about. And if you look at India, we have about over 60% of our population, really 65% of the population is rural, and 60% of, about 47% of them are actually dependent on agriculture, right? And 60% of our agriculture is rain-fed. So if you really look at these numbers, then it tells you the number of people that are affected by the climate risks that we are all talking about. When you talk about the planet, while it's the humanity which has caused the anger of the planet due to the cascading of the effects of whatever actions have been taken over the last several centuries. But now these are the people who are currently going through these crises in terms of what they are facing. So if you really look at 47%, I said, are dependent on agriculture. It's not just, for them it's a livelihood, it's about their survival. And it's also about food security. So what are we doing about it? Which is where we bring in our work in terms of how do we bring adaptation and resilience in their livelihoods. When we talk about adaptation, it is about what do we have to do in terms of making sure that their livelihoods are secure, and at the same time we are taking care of the food security aspect as well. And over the years, people have obviously kind of transitioned from the traditional practices which worked pretty well over the centuries, and adopted some practices which have resulted in whatever anger we are talking about in terms of climate risks and so on. And now we are trying to change those patterns through the work we do. I'll give you an example of what we have been doing in one of the states here. As most of you might be aware, in agriculture, paddy is a water-intensive crop, and if you grow that in a rain-fed area where there is not enough water, then you are doing damage on multiple fronts there. So we are trying to do that, convert that back to what the natural crops are there in that particular state of the country. And that requires a lot of work with the communities. It requires a lot of multi-stakeholder. It requires multi-stakeholder engagement in getting the communities and the markets and everybody aligned there. And it requires partnerships to make sure that they still are protecting their livelihoods, because at the end of the day, we cannot tell them move from here to there, or rather switch from one crop to another without securing their livelihoods in terms of their income levels. We have to protect their income levels. So that's where we need to bring in the community, we need to bring in the local institutions, we need to bring in the local community organizations, we need to bring the commercial organizations who are into the markets for procurement and so on, all that stuff. That's the kind of ecosystem approach we take in making sure that one, we're taking care of the planet by way of using the right kind of crops there that suit the local soils. We take care of the protection of the livelihoods, and we take care of the food security and diversity and so on. So this is just an example of how we address this thing. And so this is the climate adaptation and resilience part of it. We also address the disaster part of it in terms of the preparedness and as well as response part of it. I'll come back to that part of it later in the conversation, maybe after my colleagues have shared their thoughts on whatever experiences that they have.
Yes, absolutely. That's one of the key questions also. So how can we build this resilience in reality? It sounds very nice, but what can you do in communities? And also, how do we leverage these expertise and capacities of communities, and also where's the finance for adaptation of such measures? Where's the investment? With that, I think we move to the next speaker, which is Kwame Owino, and he is from Kenya, Chief Executive Officer of the Institute of Economic Affairs, and we all know that the Horn of Africa is one of these regions which is really hard hit by climate change. So, Mr. Owino, please, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. I think, well, to spend the 5 minutes that I have properly, and I have to give you context about what kind of country Kenya is, and I think that is typical of countries in sub-Saharan Africa. So this is a country that is 38th largest in the world in terms of land mass. 60% of its people live on subsistence agriculture, and an income per capita of about $2,900 per person per year. That's on a fixed, on direct exchange rates. On a purchasing power parity, it's closer to double of that. So the question I ask myself is, what does, with adaptation or responses and the risk of climate change and its effects on farmers and people in generally is not disputed much. So I won't go for platitudes by saying it's certain, because for some people they still debate, and that can be. But I think, what does it require? One of the things that we think it does is climate change and disasters that issue from climate change demonstrate the competence of government in the provision of public goods. And so the kind of public goods that are necessary and required will actually be, the provision levels and the quality will actually be more salient under this. So I give the example. Between the year 2018 to last year, to the year before last, for 5 consecutive years, Kenya had suboptimal rainfall. Remember, 60% of the people live directly on farms. So harvests were poor, that affects food availability, prices go up. And then last year, we had, in the space of 2 days, 2.5 days, in some parts of Kenya, the equivalent of 8 months of rain on a general year. So then it issues as a flood. So first you had the problem of insufficient food and food prices going up before Mr. Putin decides to get adventurers in Eastern Europe. So the prices of grains were rising. Then you have this other shock, which is deluge of, floods. And in those 5 years, people forgot you're dealing with the crisis, and therefore forgot to reinforce barriers, flood control and stuff like that. So it's one disaster after the other, more or less on the same people who've been vulnerable. So that's the first thing. So basically, one of the things that this climate change is causing is that. The second is there are tropical forests across Africa, and they're huge sinks, but they've been encroached upon. And there's a connection between zoonotic diseases, which can generate epidemics, right? And so that's, again, will call to government the ability to distribute, access vaccines, conduct the kind of research and development that is required to respond. So you see that climate change and its effects, in direct and indirect forms, are generating crises which require government to be on the front line and to be competent. And governments are not always competent, but it's going to raise that. The third question is basically early warning systems. Again, good early warning systems tend to be public goods because you issue them to be able to. So all those happen. And because we now know that in the last 30 years in recorded rainfall patterns in Kenya are changing, in the sense that we used to have the short rains coming up in early January, between February to March. They've moved 2 months forth. And so the planting seasons are completely disrupted. There's new learning that needs to be made. So basically the new science, research and development that's required to actually generate information about what's the most predictable seeds, but the best way is to actually respond to make sure that harvests are not sufficiently affected out here. I mentioned this because 70% of Kenyans live in a household in which farming is a major source of income. So government, again, has to come in. The construction of water pans and dams and water trapment, basically at scale, are things that only governments can construct, right? So that's it. So the first is public goods. And I've talked about research and development in new seed varieties and all that are more drought resistant. But I come to the third technology, which is because we're in Raisina, I come from the Institute of Economic Affairs, forgive me, but I think it's the truth that economies and trade are actually a form of technology, in the sense that it's an institution that facilitates exchange of goods and services. And Kenya imports 30% of its grain from global markets. So what that means is, as we go forth, food systems will be affected, supply of food may shift here and there, and those disruptions that cause huge shortages, for instance, require that countries that have surpluses, wink, wink, India, that has surpluses in grain, should actually open them out for global trade. But that's not what happens when disasters happen. So the ability to keep multilateral systems and mechanisms for moving and global markets become a technology that is essential, not just for the trade of vaccines, as we saw in 2021 in the thick of COVID, but also when shocks such as these happen in certain parts of the world. So I conclude with the fact that we could say some things about what public sector and private sector could do, but I think these shocks are going to come more frequently. They're going to be different before we have the science to actually be able to predict them, but they're going to demonstrate to us which are the competent governments and which are the ones that need some learning to do. So there's a lot of learning for governments throughout the world, I think not just on the African continent and in Kenya specifically, but all other parts of the world to catch up with. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you also for bringing in this governance angle. I think it's very interesting that we've now heard from, let's say, 2 representatives from regions in the world where there is a lot of rain-fed subsistence farming, where there are a lot of farmers. And then we've also heard from Canada, a region where you have these huge intensive farming practices with high production levels and also different climate. But all emphasize also the need to cooperate. And I think the next speaker is very well suited to bring also to the table how to cooperate, but also how to use technologies to switch maybe a little bit from this small subsistence rain-fed farming to smarter ways of increasing productivity, because that will also be needed. So Rahul Savani, you are the president for the Asia Pacific of Corteva Agri-Science, and you are the one that really has this expertise on these technological approaches and fixes. So we would very much like to hear from you. What can farmers do that first have 5 dry years and then the rain comes out of the sky like mad? How can they build their resilience to this angry planet?
Thank you so much, Louise, and it's a pleasure to be here talking to all of you today. Firstly, I will just echo a few of the words that my co-panelists said over here. Number one, I think the number of challenges that we are dealing with today are not just one. The planet is angry, but there's a lot of anger to go around, right? What all are we dealing with? Well, we're dealing with geopolitical unrest. We heard about that. We're dealing with still the impacts of a major health crisis that we faced, which caused disruptions in supply chains. We're still recovering from that. We're dealing with inflation on many necessities across the globe, which is amongst the highest it's ever been. Now, add on top of that, the word you've heard over here, everybody's mentioned, climate change. The impacts that we are seeing of climate change, the unpredictability that we are seeing from climate change, makes it hard for anybody to be able to deal with all of those challenges while being resilient, adaptable, and being able to pivot very quickly. Now, when we look at climate change, really, apart from unpredictable weather patterns that we spoke about and the harm they cause to agriculture, you're dealing with new pests in areas which never had those pests. Colder places have become, not Canada maybe yet, but they're colder places which have become warmer than they were earlier. They're new pests, they're new species of weeds that we are dealing with. All of that is a change that we are not used to with our traditional practices that we've had in agriculture. Simultaneously, resources that we deploy that are core to our rural communities and to agriculture, land, water, all of them are in shorter supply. There is less less water available today. The competition for land and what you do with it is a lot more. What that means for all of us is we've got to find a solution today to it. It's an imperative to find a solution. Most importantly, and you see us representing different parts of the world, I think one of the most important things is learning from each other, sharing practices. Canada is dealing with climate change and it's deploying different tools. India is deploying different tools. And I'm sure there's Netherlands, which is deploying different tools too. And we have a lot to learn from each other, firstly, to deal with climate change. It also requires partnerships. Partnerships we never thought about before. You spoke about the partnership you need with the rest of the world to be able to become more resilient in food security. And I think that's so important. We require public sector, private sector, and all other stakeholders to get together to provide these solutions. What we also need, most importantly in my mind, is engagement with the communities that are most impacted. They know the problems, they know practical solutions, and if we engage them, we will come up with solutions that can scale a lot more. And then the final thing I would add, and I'm a big believer in this, innovation. Innovation, innovation. To be able to adapt to something that's very different, that's unpredictable, we have the basic tools from innovation. We've got digital technologies that can help us adapt much faster. We've got tools from my industry, agriculture inputs. The footprint, environmental footprint, and the control you have today on a pest. The environmental footprint is much lower, the control is much greater. It comes with innovation. We've got seeds that can be resilient, a lot more resilient to the change in climate. That means more yields. It also means not just addressing food security through that, but also making farmers more successful and rural communities more prosperous. And that's a key pillar for us. The final thing I would say is we've got to provide the right incentives for innovation, the right environment for innovation, and we need to be able to, as a society, do it at speed. Do it at speed, bring them to market much faster. That's how we solve this triangle of problems that I think of. We've got to balance and feed and provide food security to a growing population. We've got to do it while also making our rural communities and vulnerable communities successful and more prosperous. And we've got to do it while having less impact, less of a footprint on the environment. That triangle can only be solved with innovation and collaboration across the chain. I'll pass it back to you, Louise.
All right, thank you so much. I think it's really fascinating what you mentioned, as the Netherlands indeed is a highly productive agricultural country, and they pride themselves, the farmers, very much for their innovation spirits, which is very much true. But the difficulty is with the environmental and sustainability transitions, and also the sentiment on the divide between the rural areas and the urban areas that we talked about. And we had a little bit of a talk before we started this panel, and we recognized this, but not so much for Kenya and also not so much for Canada. So we wanted to learn also, you know, how can we do it better, and especially also because our next speaker is also from Europe, from the south. Sara Roversi, she's the founder and president of the Future Food Institute in Italy, and she's really one of these key people that has really thought about, you know, new ways to produce food systems. And you live also in the countryside, and you are growing, I think, food. We very much look forward to hear your perspective on the issue.
It's tough to be the last one after all of you. So thank you so much for the inspiring words. I'm trying to connect all the dots, but I would love also to share with you some reflections about what is happening out there. Because actually in these days, in Italy, in Portugal, in Spain, in Brussels, but also here in India. We see the protest of the farmers. And while I was eating, I was thinking if all of you have been thinking about what you were choosing over there. Have you thought about what you have been choosing over there? I don't know. I think it's something very complex, and you have been talking a lot about how much we have been accelerating in technology, in science, how much we need the government involved. But I strongly believe that we are missing something. We, in these years, we have been always counting, for me as a private sector, always counting on the governments. They're going to solve the solutions. They're going to find everything. We need their subsidies. Of course, this is something that needs to change because, yes, government plays a crucial role, but also we need entrepreneurs that are going to be more responsible. We need people to become more responsible. So I was here also last year, and Raisina for me is pretty inspiring because we go in Davos, we go at COP, we go in New York and UN, blah, 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 and so on. But then sometimes from the Western side of the world, we're missing a little bit how much the equilibrium of the planet is changing. And so for me, coming at Raisina is pretty inspiring because I'm learning every time. And this time I decided to come here 2 days before, and I spent 3 days in Andhra Pradesh with the poorest of the poorest. Because I was meeting in COP28, Vijay Kumar. I don't know if you know him, but I met this man that was pretty inspiring, and he was sharing at COP this model that they have been implementing since many years in Andhra Pradesh. And I was not thinking to share that, but after your words, I was thinking that this is something that is interesting to share. And I went there because I'm dealing with innovation every single day, working with governments, with super large, huge corporations that now are investing not millions, not billions, but 3 trillions have been invested in regenerative farming from all the largest food corp. So there are big worlds, carbon farming, carbon finance, regenerative farming. All of those words are buzzing everywhere. And so I started connecting the dots. This guy in Andhra Pradesh is working with the poorest of the poorest, implementing a regenerative farming model. Out there are people fighting and screaming because farming is still not rights for the rights of farmers. But if I talk with the women in Andhra Pradesh, and now there are more than 70,000 farmers, they aim to reach 6 million farmers in the next years ahead. They are employing 10,000 people in the system, teaching. They have been investing in an academy, in trainings. And talking with these people, I understand that this is a need that came from people. Women became doctors, now are starting hospitals. In the hospital, there are farms. They are caring about nutrition. They said, okay, we are going to fight food security, teaching to people how to grow natural food with no chemicals. So they're going to be independent. Of course, this is an utopia if we need to deal with a big food corporation. So we need to understand what we can learn from these systems. Because probably, and I have been all focused in tech and digital transformation for all of those years, I'd say at least 15 years, we've been speeding up very fast in technology, investment, VC, investing in food tech, climate tech, and so on. But we've been missing the area of the consciousness, because climate change and all of those issues needs to be solved inside all of us before doing some step forwards, just finding the technical solution. We need something more that is missing. We have been not training people in bringing back the values. If I see what we teach in our classrooms, we are training superheroes. They are all super smart. We are going fast, and we need that. But if I see also our school system, our university, they're not caring about the soul, the values. And if we don't bring back the values, we cannot foster collaboration. We cannot start to talk with our governments and work together with our governments. We cannot fight with the governments. We need to work together with our governments. And let's say, I feel that every single day. And we at the Future Food Institute, we decided to work with the communities, and we're working in different parts of the world, but also we are part of the development plans. And this is something that needs long-term vision. We cannot solve these issues in a minute, and we cannot solve it just thinking from Italy, just thinking from Africa, thinking from India. I think that we need to solve it together, because what was in your dish probably was crossing at least 20 borders to process these French fries, to eat this kind of white flour, and so on. And so this requires all of us, whatever is the sector you're coming from. So I think that this is a huge issue. We are not talking enough, and we are not acting enough on that.
All right, thank you. And thank you also for bringing this, let's say, more social side of the story to the food debate, and also all of us here in this room. I know that we are also joined here by very bright minds, and I wonder also how you have listened to this introductory remarks and to the panel contributions, and what kind of questions you have on your mind. I would have a few, but yeah, I see a lot of hands. Great, 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 great. Okay, I'll go like this. So I'll start with you, and then I go to you, to you, to you, and to you. And if you can briefly introduce yourself, and then just ask a short question, then that would be great.
Thank you so much. My name is Kira Finke. I am from the German Council on Foreign Relations, and my question goes to Mr. Ovino. Thank you very much for this intriguing discussion. My question is, you have mentioned a lot on the economic impacts, and I would like to know what you think are the underlying societal impacts of those economic impacts, and how societies and people's identities are affected by these changes, the livelihoods that are often connected to traditions, etc., especially in rural areas. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. We collect a few questions, please, over there.
Good evening. I'm Subhavika. I'm working as a public health medicine specialist in South Africa. I'd like to know that, noting that we need a whole of government and whole of society approach within a One Health approach framework to address these issues, has this been successful, or is this the right trajectory that you all are on? And if so, what were the main barriers and lessons learned? I'd like to address this to Mr. Kumar and Mr. Ovino, please. Thank you.
Wow, whole of society. Please.
Good evening. Thank you very much for this very beautiful panel. I'm Yasemin from Turkey. I'm an academic in Turkey. One of the inevitable results of this kind of disasters is the human movement. Although we already started calling certain group of people as climate refugees, but we all know that there is no such thing in international refugee law. It's not a legal status. And also there are individuals who had to basically move or change their villages because they cannot farm it because of the poor quality of the soil. And we also call them as economic migrants because, again, they are not recognized as refugees according to the 1951 refugee conventions. So do you think international community takes necessary steps to make these individual situations better? Because simply they don't have recognition, they had to continue their lives through irregular ways in their new landings. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And then there's two more. If you keep really short the questions, then we can take them, and then we go back to the panel.
Hi, I'm Rebecca. I work at the British High Commission in New Delhi. My question's on, so at COP28 we saw the mobilisation of the Loss and Damage Fund. So I was just wondering what the panel's hopes for loss and damage at COP29 would be, in particular on early warning and early action.
Great, thank you. Final question is for you.
Hi there, I'm Kevin from the Australian National University. I understand that agriculture is part of a broader issue of national resilience. And I was wondering if there are broader implications for the sort of research that you guys have been doing at the national level, and if there are broader implications, what would those be, and what's most important for policymakers to consider? Thank you.
All right, thank you. Well, then we go back to the panelists. Maybe we should go back to the order, because I also know that the Premier of Canada has to still catch a flight later this evening. Please, the floor is yours.
Maybe just a couple of comments on, it comes back to really the adaptation and resiliency. And there's a question from Turkey on some of the soil deterioration, some of the impacts that actually start to affect the food security part of the conversation, due to a changing climate, deteriorating soil conditions and whatnot. I think, I would go back to the collaboration of at events. We were at COP28 with a significant delegation, an agricultural delegation. Many of our post-secondary institutes were there, creating collaboration points, creating partnerships with post-secondary institutes around the world so that they can share in research and share in some of what is working not only in the food production system, but to share what is working from a sustainable production perspective. So part of that is in adapting the production methods so that you can continue to produce. Bringing in, for example, varieties of crops that are more drought tolerant, for instance, and bringing that into some of the crops that maybe have traditionally been grown in a certain part of the world. In Saskatchewan, in the last 30 years, and I would say in Western Canada and into the Midwestern United States, there's been a dramatic shift in the production system that is largely improving the soil conditions that we have. We're sequestering carbon into our soils, building the organic matter content, really enhancing the ability for those soils through an increased organic matter content to retain more moisture. And we're able to actually produce more crop because there is more moisture available to those crops. And so that innovation and technology, which has largely been pioneered in the province where I live, part of that is the type of seeding implements that are built. And I was here about a year ago. We were on a farm with a number of Indian farmers out of Chandigarh. I was here actually in the back is a former Prime Minister of Canada, Stephen Harper. We were standing on a drill, an air drill that was our planter that was built in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. And what was significant is we were on a farm in India standing on this planter. There was 1,000 of them that were sold through commerce, collaboration through commerce. And that cropping system now is available with one of the most, I would say, innovative drills in the world to be utilized here in a country of India where largely the residue is burnt, which is doing exactly the opposite of building organic matter in your soil. And so there's a real life example today of sharing in innovation and technology, literally on the other side of the world for us, and providing maybe that opportunity where some of that is going to help and improve the soil health to some degree here in India, like it has in the province where I live. And so I provide that as one example of how collaboration is working today. And I think as a government leader of a subnational government, what we really try to focus on is opening up those points for people to collaborate around the world, which is why we went to COP28 as a subnational government. It's why we brought a significant agricultural delegation there, was so that they could open up those points of collaboration for years into the future to really provide opportunities, as opposed to maybe we'd be sitting here in a few years not talking about an angry planet, but the opportunities that have come from these very conversations.
Mm-hmm. Right, thank you. And thank you for being so solution oriented, much appreciated. So I would like to now go to Yaganatha Kumar for your responses.
I would first start answering the question about government and society, then I will answer all of this in a combined way. So I think that's what I meant when I said multi-stakeholder partnership in terms of addressing these challenges. That's basically government obviously is a part of that because irrespective of how much the communities can do or the local organizations can do, it's the government which formulates the policies and facilitates implementation. So unless they are on board, but at the same time taking the grassroots into account, because they are the ones who are affected. So it's a combination. It can't be one or the other. So that's how we work actually with the government as well as with the communities. Both sides we work and we try to bridge. For example, one of the things we do is in terms of accessing government sources from a data point of view, and making that information available to the communities at the grassroots in an actionable form. Otherwise, there is information available which is not necessarily understood in an actionable form by the communities. That's the bridge we try to provide there. In fact, in India, for example, you have the land use, land cover maps provided by National Remote Sensing Center. So while they are there, that capability exists there. How do you translate that in terms of they being usable by the communities, by the farmers, for example, right? So that tells you the soil health, it tells you the vegetation, it tells you about the availability of water resources and all that stuff. A combination of all this is what makes it work there. And so then you'll know what crop to grow where and so on, and what intensity of those things. It's a combined effort actually. So, and then talking about the early warning and early action question, actually, one of the important things to do is this is not a single dimensional issue for us. Often people look at early warning, but we need to look at it in a kind of holistic way. The approach we take is that of multi-hazard, impact-based forecasting and warning system. It is not just early warning system. When I say multi-hazard impact-based forecast and warning system, it has to take all three levels in terms of what is the data you have about the hazards, for example, the natural or the climate-related data. What's the data you have on the exposure, which is to do with the infrastructure and assets on the ground, and what's the data you have on the vulnerability, which is about the communities, the social demographic context of the communities, including how many pregnant women and all those things. When you have all this information mapped together, then you can come with actionable information, which would be useful for the people working on the ground or for the communities who have to safeguard themselves. That's how we can actually save lives and livelihoods in a much better way. And in fact, we can avoid the so-called climate refugees. How do we make them take early actions in a way that they don't become refugees? So that's the preventive step that we are trying to work on. So these are all the, obviously with the availability of technology, with the data science capabilities and the big data, data analytics, what you call AI, a whole lot of things. We use all these tools, in fact, in what we do in order to minimize these adverse effects of the angry planet, actually. So, and in going by the global, what you call SDGs, I think there is a, while climate SDG 13, 14, 15 are there, but we need to look at them also in a holistic way. Climate action, life on Earth, life underwater, and combine that with 12, responsible consumption and production. So it's a combination of all these 4 SDGs that will make us resilient in a way.
Yeah. It's always a pleasure to hear this SDG. We hardly hear it in Europe. Responsible production and consumption. It's not much talked about. I also liked very much that you brought up the data in relation to the early warning, because that always reminds me to IGAD in the Horn of Africa, that has a fantastic system and raised the alarm bell during the COVID pandemic that, you know, the harvests that you talked about were not going well. But then to shift from early warning to early action, that's still a difficult part. You know, how to activate the international community, especially in today's world where there is so much needs. But there's also examples of early warning, for instance, in this part of the world, South Asia, that works better, and where farmers also have this information on their phone readily available and can be better prepared. But there's still lots of ways to improve these systems, and I hope to also find them in your book of the Resilience Foundation. So Kwame Owino, what are your responses to the issues that were brought to the table, the questions that were asked?
All right, 2 questions. I think the first, I forgot your name. But if I heard you right, what you're asking is what are the underlying societal impacts of these economic phenomena that I spelled out. I think it's clear. Weather shocks in general, especially for countries where most households are dependent on subsistence farming, weather shocks lead to, predictably, school absenteeism. At the worst case, kids fall away from school because if parents have to move or they have to go into camps, or if that safety doesn't happen, it does. Sometimes school closures, because if classes are flooded, in some cases not. And remember, sometimes get flooded. And these are examples you can find if you check out Kenya. You find some very interesting things on YouTube where some schools were built very close to river systems and lakes. And so when there's flooding, you actually have hippos, you know, that big one, swimming into classrooms so kids can stay there. I mean, I don't say these to be flippant. I say this to show that these are real shocks and they require government responses in a very definite way. Absenteeism, in some cases, of course, lost lives and insecurity. So there's a whole potly of social effects that come from that. The last question, which must be related, is I interpret it as related to this. What are that are mentioned? We did not mention broader implications of disaster at national level. Again, one of the embarrassing things about disasters when government is not prepared and you don't have good disaster response is that suddenly there's a whole lot of money coming in here, and without systems for accountability and everything else. So in Kenya, one of the things that happens predictably is when you have a disaster, there are all manner of donations from private sector, government pumps in money from emergency funds, and 2 years down the line, there's investigations because of pilferage. So basically what that shows us is the preparedness that's required to be able to respond should be as complete as is possible. Because when you have to do it because an emergency has taken place and you have to do it because you have to respond, people are responding by flying off the seat of their pants. You don't have a good protocol for what to do, where, and all that. So systems like that happen. I think, finally, one of the things that government, of course, has responded to in Kenya increasingly is there's a mobile money transfer mechanism, so you don't have to send cash. So government has a database of households, especially those that are most vulnerable. And so cash transfers are sent directly to phones so that people are able to respond in real time. So that's the kind of thing. So yes, there are technology solutions, but in the end, most of this depends on government's bureaucracy, the cleanness of that bureaucracy, and in general, the competence of its delivery of very sophisticated responses when a disaster has occurred.
All right, thank you. Any response on the loss and damage question? How it could be used? No? Okay. Rahul, the floor is yours.
Great. So firstly, I would say I think there was a question about when we talk about climate change and agriculture, a lot of it can be related to and thought of as food security. And I just want to highlight one thing, that it is much more than food security alone, right? I think you heard about what agriculture means to rural communities. In many of these countries, it's about not just livelihoods, it's about a family unit, it's about rural communities and the economy over there itself, and it's about upliftment of those, right? So it's not just about food security, but you've got to balance the food security with all of those different aspects. As I hear the conversation, there are three things that come to my mind, which I think are really important for us to be able to solve this, not solve for it, but at least build resilience towards this crisis. The first one, we're asking people to change practices, adapt practices, which have been there for generations, absolute generations. And we are asking them to do that very fast, right? To be able to do that, we've got to find mechanisms to educate, engage and educate. Here we are talking about hundreds of millions of farmers. No one company, no one government, no one entity can reach those hundreds of millions of farmers. We've all got to find models to collaborate, to be able to reach them, to be able to engage them and educate them for these tools. What that means, I'll give you an example from what we do at Corteva. We run a program in India called a Pravakta program. Pravakta, if you translate it, means spokesperson. We've run this program for tens of years now. We run it at scale. These are lead farmers who've demonstrated they can understand technology, adapt to it, and adopt it, and deploy it. But they're not only interested in that. What they're also interested in is being able to create that impact across their communities. So they act as spokespeople for us, not to buy a product, not to sell a product, but actually to teach farming practices that they've learned to their villages and a series of villages. The second big thing we have to do, apart from education, is empowerment. Sarah, I think you spoke about the role women play in agriculture in places like India. And when you go to rural India, you see that on a daily basis. You go to the tribal areas, and you very much see them be part of that unit of agriculture. They are a key decision maker. What we can do for them is give them knowledge, empower them with knowledge, give them knowledge about credit, how to run a business, give them knowledge about technology, and you see them thrive. We have a agri-entrepreneur program that we run in tribal areas with women, and we've seen such good results. They have market linkages today, they've got credit availability, and they're able to actually contribute to solving for better agriculture for that family unit. And then I'm going to come back to where I left my last my last comment earlier. I still believe all of that, along with innovation that's faster, that's science-based, encouraging that, being able to take it to market fast, gives you, today's technology is a lot more resilient, it's a lot smarter, it has a lot less footprint. We've got to adopt that innovation. We've got to have systems that allow it to be able to come to market faster when it meets that criteria. Not just one system where everything progresses in the same way. We've got to be able to prioritize those which make the biggest difference across these different factors. So those are the three things I would highlight.
Right, thank you so much. And then the final words for you, Sarah, to shed some light on the table. I'm not sure if we can really answer all the questions. I know the migration question, it's a very pertinent one.
It's not going to be my answer, unfortunately. I'm so sorry.
And also the finance issue, you know, where can we find the finance for adaptation and its, let's say, extreme version, the loss and damage, and how can it be spent well, also in many countries that are devastated then by climate impacts. But I'm sure we're going to be discussing that also at other venues, but thanks for raising the issues. All right, Sarah, the final words for you.
I cannot repeat what is just said, but I want to subscribe every single word you said. So I just want to invite all of us to take advantage of the next global gathering, such as COP29, of course, to not only think about the One Health approach, but acting in a one systemic approach. I don't want to see the climate day, and then the food day, and then the health day, and so on. Because the issue is systemic and we need to approach it in a systemic way. So I think that this is going to be the largest global effort we need to do, because this requires patience, listening. We need to start to think how is thinking, how is thinking, how is acting. I need to understand what is needed to adapt my perspective. And this is, of course, something that requires a different mindset. So we need really to shift our mindset and our approach to all of those global issues. And then education, 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 education. I need to educate myself every single day. So I really think that we need to put ourselves, our communities, our companies, our governments in this kind of mindset, because this is what we need now as never before. Thank you so much. I've been learning a lot. Thanks to all of you, and thanks to Raisina for giving us the opportunity to meet such bright mind and spark even more reflection and go back tomorrow in our countries and take action, because this is what is needed.
Thank you. And it leaves me to ask for a big round of applause for the speakers. And thank you all for joining.